Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen. So, as I mentioned in the teacher message video, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about the War of 1812. That is our unit number 8. That is what unit number 8 is all about. And I want to talk specifically about the causes of the War of 1812. Now, the War of 1812 is really going to give the United States a strong sense of patriotism, and it's going to make the United States kind of a stronger player in the rest of the world and really kind of make the United States a little bit more powerful and a little stronger. And it's, like I said, it's really going to give the people of the United States a strong sense of nationalism, a strong sense of patriotism in the United States. But what I want to focus on today, we'll mention that in the next couple of days, in the next couple of lessons. But what I want to focus on today is I specifically want to focus on the causes of the War of 1812. And those causes are really going to go ahead and start right in Thomas Jefferson's second term. Remember, Jefferson served from 1800 to 1808. So this is going to be the causes of the War of 1812 are really going to kind of start between the years 1804 and 1808. Excuse me. So most of these causes are going to revolve around British involvement in kind of affairs of the United States. So I want to take a look at two of these that really have a major impact and are really kind of the major causes for the War of 1812 and why you're going to have congressmen and senators calling for war with Britain. And the first spot I want to look in, most of these are really violations of neutrality. So remember, England and France are both at war during Thomas Jefferson's 2 terms as president. They are fighting a war against each other. And it's actually even been happening since, if you remember, since before Jefferson's presidency. Washington declared the Neutrality Proclamation in 1793, declaring the United States neutral in that conflict because he knew that if the United States got pulled into one side, it would ultimately be defeated, or if the United States went to war with either France or Britain, the United States would end up being defeated. So Washington was trying to keep the United States out of war. John Adams was trying to keep the United States out of war. And now Thomas Jefferson is really trying to do the same thing. He's trying to keep the United States out of war because he believes, much like Adams and Washington did, that the United States won't be able to survive a war with England or France. So he's really trying to stay neutral. And the United States has stuck to the Neutrality Proclamation of 1793 all the way up to basically the War of 1812. So that has been the policy of the United States. And Jefferson is trying to continue that neutrality. The United States is still trading with both France and England. And France and England are both nervous about what the United States is trading with their enemy that they are fighting in this war. So both France and England have decided to take and board U.S. ships and inspect U.S. ships going to England or France to try to make sure that there are no weapons on those ships, and they will confiscate those weapons if they need to. So in this war, you have American ships that are being boarded. You have the cargo of these ships being investigated. And the British are actually taking it a step further, and they are impressing American merchant sailors into the British Navy. So you guys should have looked up the definition for impressment yesterday when you did your key terms. It was the first key term on the list. If you are impressed into the British Navy, you are forced to serve in the British Navy. And the way that the British got around this was by saying and arguing that the American sailors that were on these merchant ships were actually runaway British citizens and runaway British sailors that had tried to desert the British Navy and tried to leave the British Navy. Now, this wasn't actually true. This wasn't actually the case. They were American citizens that were serving on these ships and helping these merchants sell their goods, but the British didn't care. So they were forcing American sailors, U.S. citizens, to leave these merchant ships and serve in the British Navy. They were forcing them into the British Navy. And according to historical records, during this time period, about 5,000 U.S. citizens were forced to go serve in the British Navy. Now, this is going to really, really anger not only the people of the United States, but Congress and Thomas Jefferson as well. And in one particular event, it's known as the Chesapeake Affair, a British warship attacked the USS Chesapeake and impressed 4 American sailors on June 22nd, 1807. That is just one example of what the British were doing when they were trying to stop weapons from getting to France and trying to stop the U.S. from providing weapons to France for their war effort. So the British were actually taking it a step further, like I said before, and forcing American sailors to serve in the British Navy. This is going to anger Thomas Jefferson. It's going to anger Congress, and it's going to anger most, if not all, American citizens in the United States. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. Excuse me. So this is already going to anger the United States and frustrate the United States and kind of give them a bad impression of England and cause people to want to go to war with England. Now, Jefferson is going to try to respond to this impressment, and the way he does it is he kind of creates and has Congress pass the Embargo Act of 1807. Now, an embargo is where you decide that you don't want to trade with a particular country, or if there are multiple countries on a continent, you can choose to not trade with a continent. And that's exactly what Jefferson does. In response to the Chesapeake Affair 6 months later, Congress passes the Embargo Act of 1807, which says that the United States is no longer allowed to trade goods with any country in Europe at all. So they can't sell goods, they can't buy goods. So he completely stops trade with Europe altogether. Now, that is a peaceful way to really kind of hurt the British and punish the British. At least that's the way Jefferson saw it. Jefferson thought that by not trading these goods that Americans were selling to England and to France, that would cause them to stop boarding American ships, and in the case of the British, it would force the British to stop impressing U.S. sailors into the British Navy. The problem is that does more harm to the U.S. economy than it does to the British or the French. The British and the French continue to board American merchant ships, and the U.S. economy ends up going into a nosedive and ends up going into a depression and causing the U.S. to end up in a depression where a lot of people are out of work, a lot of businesses are not making money, and stuff like that. So ultimately, the Embargo Act of 1807 does more harm to the United States, which is why it is repealed in 1809. So that attempt at a response to the British kind of violating the neutrality of the United States is a good idea in theory, but it doesn't ultimately work. And it actually forces the United States to kind of repeal it and forces them to kind of rethink their ideas about how they want to react to this British violation of U.S. neutrality. Excuse me. So that is the first way that the British kind of violate the neutrality of the United States. The second way that the British are going to really violate the neutrality of the United States is going to come in the form of a conflict between the United States and Native Americans that live in the western frontier, the newly purchased Louisiana Territory. So once Jefferson purchases the Louisiana Territory in 1803, U.S. citizens and farmers are going to move out to the Louisiana Territory in large numbers. They want to settle that land. They want to grow their crops, try to strike it rich. But the problem is Native Americans, the problem, at least for these farmers that are moving there in their eyes, is that Native Americans live there. And much of the land that Native Americans want, or much of the land that farmers want, much of the land that U.S. farmers want is actually owned by Native Americans. So the U.S. farmers aren't really worried about that. They are going to move onto that land and take over that land, whether Native Americans protested or not. So Native Americans are going to become very frustrated by the fact that these settlers are moving into the Northwest Territory and moving into the Mississippi River Basin in the Louisiana Territory and are taking their land. So the British see an opportunity and they begin to provide Native Americans with weapons. And a man by the name of Tecumseh, a Native American man by the name of Tecumseh, and his brother, who is nicknamed the Prophet, decide that they want to resist this takeover of native land by these U.S. settlers. So what they decide to do is they decide to go to many of the different Native American tribes that live in this area, that live in the Louisiana Territory, and they try to explain to them that the only way that they can resist U.S. citizens and white settlers from moving into and taking over Native American land is by banding together and coming together and fighting them as a very large group and as a big group. So Tecumseh and the Prophet actually convince many or all of those Native American tribes to band together in what is known as the Northwest Confederacy. And at first, they are successful and they are able to prevent and make it more difficult for white settlers to move into native lands. However, eventually, the governor of the Louisiana Territory, a guy by the name of William Henry Harrison, is going to take and kind of try to build up an army, and he's going to try to resist and try to push back and prevent this Northwest Confederacy from taking over and from preventing U.S. citizens from settling and prevent this Northwest Confederacy from attacking settlers moving into native land. Ultimately, Tecumseh and his brother are going to be defeated. The Northwest Confederacy is going to be defeated by U.S. forces at the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811. And ultimately, many of those tribes are going to be forced to move to reservations all over the Louisiana Territory. The thing that is going to really frustrate the United States is this line right here, these two lines right here. The British are going to see an opportunity to slow the movement of Americans westward. And the British are going to see an opportunity to slow America's westward expansion. England still has some control. They have control over Canada, and they have some control over lands, the Oregon Territory in the northwest of the United States. And they want to take and hold on to that. So they also want to prevent the United States from becoming stronger and more powerful than they are. And by expanding and gaining those resources and gaining the timber and the trees for wood and having more land to grow crops and stuff like that, that is going to take and make the United States much more wealthy and much stronger. And the British kind of want to stop that and prevent that. So that's why they start providing Native Americans with weapons, which is going to really anger the United States because the United States sees that as the British kind of trying to seize it for exactly what it is. The British are trying to stop them from growing. They're trying to prevent them from getting stronger and becoming wealthy and stuff like that. And the fact that they're just interfering in affairs of the United States is going to anger the people of the United States and anger Congressmen and Adams and Madison, James Madison, who is going to become president after Jefferson. It's going to anger all of them. So that is the second way that the British are going to really kind of violate the rights of the United States and really involve themselves in the affairs of the United States by providing Native Americans with weapons to fight the United States. So those two things are really going to take and anger the United States, and they're going to lead many congressmen, many young congressmen, and many other government officials and many people in the United States as a whole to really call for a war with England, a second revolutionary war, if you will, because the United States sees it as the British are still trying to kind of control the United States and violating their liberty and their independence, which is something that the United States cannot stand for. So you are going to have, in 1810, many of these congressmen, such as John C. Calhoun and Henry Clay, are going to really argue strongly and try to advocate or convince the United States to go to war. And these congressmen are going to be known as war hawks, really kind of arguing loudly to declare war with England and really kind of to use a saying. They're kind of beating the drums of war. So many of these congressmen are going to call for war, and in 1812, James Madison is going to finally have to listen to them because the British have not stopped impressing American sailors, and the Battle of Tippecanoe and the Northwest Confederacy and the fact that the British were the ones that provided weapons to the Native Americans is also going to take and anger the United States and drive the United States to prepare to declare war on the British and make the arguments of congressmen like John C. Calhoun and Henry Clay much more persuasive and make people kind of listen to congressmen like Calhoun and Clay a lot more. And ultimately, in 1812, James Madison is going to declare war on the British, and the War of 1812 is going to begin. That is all I wanted to cover for today, guys. Just the two main causes of the War of 1812. So we went ahead and we talked about that. So now you guys may go ahead, if you haven't already, you can go ahead and work on your Unit 8 key terms, 1 through 10. That is going to be your homework, like I mentioned in the teacher message. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Alrighty, guys, I will catch you tomorrow for a continuation of the War of 1812. Have a great day, guys.